the Atlanta Hawks. High expectations have been placed on this team the past 2 years, all for understandable reasons. 2 years ago, they made it to the conference finals, taking out the Knicks in the first round, the Sixers in the second, before losing to the Bucks in 6 games. This created an expectation that they previously hadn't had, as they went into 2022 with the most pressure that they've had in years. Unfortunately, that season didn't go well, and they lost 4-1 to the Heat in the first round. Since 2021, there hasn't been much success for them. Losing in the first round 2 consecutive seasons in a row, there's been a lot to prove on whether the current team that's been constructed over the course of the last few years can really stand as a contender in the East. John Collins was suffering from a finger injury in the offseason that wasn't fully healed. DeAndre Hunter hadn't shown much improvement and was still an unreliable ball handler as well as a passer. Capella was clearly experiencing regression and wasn't very dependable outside of his rebound adeptness. Trey had a dip in efficiency compared to his previous year, and Dejounte Murray's defense wasn't going to cover for Trey's lack of, due to his stronger presence off the ball, rather than when guarding on ball. Even more, there was the fact that the team still had injury problems with key players such as Bogdanovic and DeAndre Hunter having constant knee issues. It didn't help that there were multiple winnable games which ruined any chance of them gaining momentum.
That's a career high in threes, man. Green turned over. 2-on-1, Murray and Young. Young runs back to the three-point line. He fires, he makes. Murray, wow, over Smith. Make it 7 triples, a new career best.
Fernando out on the break-in. A little bit of tempers flaring
shoving.
there.
There's Young and Green.
Here's the thing. Atlanta was just taunting and doing a...
That'll do it. One more shot here for Griffin. And the Rockets, who let a 10-point lead slip away, and then ended up finding themselves down by as many as 16 points, rally back to beat the Hawks here tonight. The final score 128 to 122.
Yeah. At the trade deadline, the Hawks traded for Saddiq Bey, which was a pretty good trade in my opinion. The team desperately needed some shooting, and he immediately showed his impact, shooting 40% from 3 on 5 attempts in his 25 games with the Hawks. A large problem with the Hawks organization lies in their front office. In the 2022 offseason, Kevin Huerter was traded to the Kings for Mo Harkless and Justin Holiday and a first-round pick. This was seen as a move specifically made with the intention to avoid paying the luxury tax, despite Travis Schlenk previously saying that paying the tax did not scare him. This made room for Dejounte Murray's contract, but at the cost of a much-needed shooter off the bench. Not even a year later, Schlenk stepped down as the Hawks' president of basketball operations. Even more controversy sprouted as Nick Ressler, the 27-year-old son of Hawks owner Tony Ressler, was chosen as his replacement. It was reported that Nick had been the driving force in the Dejounte Murray trade, extending his large influence into the front office despite Travis Schlenk's doubts on if the capital sent for Murray was really worth it. This has now brought another problem to the organization of the possible nepotism going on in Atlanta. Now, a positive for this team could be that in February 2023, Nate McMillan was fired, a move that many Hawks fans rejoiced over. Whether it was the team's lack of success the past 2 years due to his offensive and defensive schemes, or the occasional news of the clashing between Trey and Nate, he was fired as a result. The Hawks hired Quinn Snyder, a notable coach who previously coached the Jazz, a team with a 3-heavy offense, ranking high in the league in defense. The thing is, just hiring a new coach can't completely fix a team riddled with problems everywhere you look, especially in such a short amount of time, and the Hawks ended the season at a perfectly balanced record of 41-41 as the 8th seed. They played extremely well in the playing game against the Heat, dominating the boards, which set them up as a 7th seed to go up against the Celtics in the first round. The first game really illustrated the Hawks' plethora of weaknesses: their inability to fight over off-ball screens, the lack of defensive awareness on backdoor cuts, the absence of a point of attack defender to guard Marcus Smart and Derek White, who were occasionally setting up screens of their own and were still successful in baiting the Hawks' defense to collapse on them before passing it out for open shots. Each game I watched, it felt like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown were taking turns as they gained the mismatch on whichever one of the Hawks defenders they could get to guard them on the perimeter. And Jason Tatum is a player you can't expect to stop every night, so it's not as if it wasn't expected for him to dominate, but there was no one on the Hawks team that could step up and say that they'd guard him, because none of them could guard him. Even when he was having an off shooting night because of his tendency to shoot a lot of threes, that wasn't something that the Hawks defense could count on every night. In the end, they lost in 6 games. To be optimistic, they took the second seed to that many games in the first place, and almost 7 if they didn't have such an abysmal fourth quarter in Game 6, but it took a Trae Young game winner for them to stay alive in the first place. On a short note on Game 6, I was seriously going through a lot of emotion throughout that game, especially when I was sure that we had lost when we were down going into the fourth and weren't showing any signs of stopping them. My whole thought process was like, I wasted all this time watching this trash team, and now I can watch the playoffs without stressing. I mean, can you blame me? Yes? Okay, maybe, but after 2022 against the Heat, I lost so much confidence in this team. Now to get back on track, I want to get onto my analysis of the team this past season, as well as project my thoughts on their offseason and expectations going into next year. Here, I've created a list of the positives and negatives of the Hawks that I saw last season. For the positives, I saw rebounding, their inside scoring, pick and roll oriented offense, and their mid-range shooting. Now their negatives, I saw their off-ball movement, 3-point shooting, and their perimeter and paint defensive awareness. The Hawks were a fairly good rebounding team, being top 10 in rebounds due to players like Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu, as well as Dejounte Murray, who's an above-average rebounding guard. Capella is great at boxing out, as well as locating the ball. And Okongwu, despite his lack of height for the average center, has good awareness when getting both offensive and defensive boards, positioning himself to get the ball over taller big men. His athleticism also gives him the edge over slower bigs. This can also apply to the other athletic forwards on the team like John Collins and Jalen Johnson. For their pick and roll offense, the Hawks punished teams with their pick and rolls between Trae Young and Capella, or Trae of John Collins. It accounted for a majority of their offense, as they are number 1 in the league in pick and roll ball handler possessions, with Trae and Murray combining for around 20 possessions a game. Trae might go around the screen and lob the ball, but he also might break out the defender and shoot a floater, while Murray might go around the screen and stop and pull up for a midi. They're number 1 in the league on points scored off the pick and roll with around 23 a game. While I have some problems with this way of offense, I can acknowledge that this is an effective point of their offense, also being a large reason that they're 3rd in the league in scoring. Now finally, onto their mid-range scoring. The Hawks attempted the 3rd most mid-range shots per game, right behind the Bulls and the Suns, with known mid-range shooters such as DeMar DeRozan, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant. They also made 46% of them, the 2nd best in the league, with Dejounte Murray 7th in the league in attempts, with 5 a game at a 47% clip. Both Trae Young and DeAndre Hunter were in the top 30 attempted, both shooting 3.2 a game. A lot of their offense thrived mainly off of their pull-up jumpers, as they are 2nd in the league in pull-up 2-pointers, right behind the Phoenix Suns. And in terms of pull-ups made, they are number 1 in the league at 8.7 made per game. Their mid-range largely came off of their heavy use of screens, where they force the defense to drop and decide whether to stay at the rim or come forward, risking the possibility of a pass reaching the screener behind them. Now onto their negatives, we first have the lack of ball movement. If you watched the Hawks last season, then it was pretty transparent that they don't move the ball as much as other teams do, as the majority of their offense is run through Trae and Dejounte Murray. In the 2023 season, the Hawks were at the bottom of the league in frontcourt touches per game, near the bottom of the league in post-ups, and they were at the bottom of the league in passes made per game. This is due to a lack of a playmaker in their starting frontcourt compared to some of the other teams in the league. John Collins and Capella are mainly pick and roll man type of players, not players you're expecting to give the ball on the perimeter to facilitate the offense. The Hawks were also in the bottom 4 teams in catch and shoot field goals attempted, while being the number 1 team in pull-up jumpers. This shows the lack of ball movement, as guys like Bogdanovic shooting 40% from 3 could be better utilized if the offense wasn't so reliant on ball handling to score. Oftentimes you have a you go, I go offense between Trae and Murray, where one guy dribbles and the other one just stands and watches instead of looking to get wide open. Hunter and Collins were reduced to corner shooters most of the time, and Bogdanovic was often forced to take contested threes. When things aren't going well for their on-ball offense, they need to be able to gain an advantage off the ball. This overall reliance on Trae and Murray can at times hurt the team when they're not playing well, because then they have no other alternatives to scoring the ball efficiently. This was very prevalent in the Boston series, especially in the fourth quarter of Game 6, where they couldn't buy a bucket after Trae and Murray were struggling in the second half. For their second negative, I'll be talking about their three-point shooting. The Hawks were in the bottom 3 in the league in three-point attempts due to their constant on-ball play style, where they're often pulling up for a mid-range shot or attacking the rim. With a front court as John Collins and Clint Capella, there isn't much spacing to work with. Collins just had his worst year shooting yet, Trae Young just had his worst shooting year since his rookie season, Clint Capella just stays in the paint, DeAndre Hunter is only a 35% shooter from deep, and Murray often settles for mid-range jumpers which, while he shoots them efficiently, the mid-range shot in today's NBA could be considered an inefficient shot as three-point shooting has grown to the point where you'll get beat just because you're going up against a better shooting team. This goes back to my talk about their lack of off-ball presence. Lastly, I'll talk about their perimeter and paint defense as a whole. This was quite possibly the worst aspect of the Hawks. They were among the top 10 worst defensive teams in the league, allowing the 5th most points per game with 118.1. With the Hawks who average 118.4 points scored per game, at the 3rd most in the league behind the Kings and the Warriors, they're still letting up too many points, with only a differential of 0.3. On defense, it's already known that Trae Young is a liability. From what I've seen last season, he's definitely improved and shows more effort on the defensive end. However, this doesn't remove from the fact that he's a very small guard that lacks defensive awareness, whether it's guarding the pick and roll, rotating to open shooters, or just guarding on ball in general, where his lack of physicality and build results in him being targeted on switches. Dejounte Murray, who was brought in most likely in hopes of hiding Trae on defense, wasn't what I would call a good point of attack defender. He excels at defending passing lanes with his quick hands and reaction speed, along with his awareness off the ball. That's why he averaged 1.5 steals per game. But when it comes to guarding quick and shifty guards who are all around today's league, he doesn't provide much from an on-ball perspective. He's often getting beat one-on-one, where they just blow by him and he has to rely on help defense. He struggles to navigate screens, and his lack of lateral movement to stay in front of defenders doesn't make it difficult for the offense in regards to getting him to bite on crosses. Even though he's pretty athletic, he'll have to show improved foot speed to prevent defenders from getting a step on him for him to be a more reliable defender, because at the moment, there aren't many guards who would struggle against him. DeAndre Hunter is known around the league as a 3-and-D player, but if you ask me whether he's a game changer on the defensive end, I wouldn't be able to tell you yes. The 6'7" forward possesses a 7'2" wingspan similar to that of a center. He's active on the defensive end and very receptive, is constantly moving his feet, and uses his long wingspan to disrupt the offense, especially on closeouts where he often gets off good quality contests. The problem is mainly with his consistency, because his defense varies on a play-to-play basis. Where he seems to struggle most is guarding players going downhill, where a lot of plays you see him just give up on the play altogether. His good instincts one play, break down the play after. Also, despite moving his feet, he can't seem to keep his body in front of guards, which is concerning considering he often gets switched onto them, something that was very prevalent in the first round against the Celtics. In 2021, before his nagging knee injuries, he showed more consistency on the defensive end. If the Hawks can get this Hunter back next season, he may very well provide some much needed defense on the team. A large problem with the bigs in their starting lineup is their defensive versatility. Clint Capella is a straight up blocker who struggles to guard the modern big, a lot of them being more athletic, and on the perimeter, he's not fast enough to prevent the drive, often being unable to keep up with the constantly moving offense. A lot of the time, the ball movement and rotating can have him looking lost, especially when he needs to run up to contest an outside shot. He's not a consistent shot blocker, and is often outplayed by crafty finishers at the rim. His defense has shown some regression over the years, and in today's NBA, if they're to keep him on this team, they'll need someone to play the versatile role for him. John Collins was more athletic than Capella, and while he could block on the move, for shifty players, especially at the same position, he isn't that quick laterally to stay in front of the ball handler. If you put him out to guard the perimeter, it will likely end in disaster. Now talking about his post defense, Collins a lot of the time is out-muscled and backed down in the post without much resistance. When it comes to contesting shots, he's often caught in the air jumping off fakes and is slow to recover. The culmination of the season was overall disappointing. There were a lot of questions about the Hawks going into the offseason due to the lack of flashes of future success with the Dejounte Trae duo, as they were exactly at 500, fighting not to drop below it for most of the season. Immediately into the offseason, it was reported that every starter outside of Trae Young was available for trade. there were some rumors of a possible trade on draft night, with them possibly including the 15th pick as a part of the trade, but it didn't happen, and they drafted 6'4" guard Kobe Buffkin at 15. They also drafted 6'6" forward Seth Lundy and traded for the draft rights of 6'11" Mohamed Gay. Going into Summer League, Kobe Buffkin really looked to be a project in the making. There were plenty of goods and bads that could be seen from watching him. Somewhat similar to Trae Young's Summer League, he definitely needed to gain some muscle, or at least adjust to the physicality of the NBA. In college, he mainly played shooting guard, so Summer League was a new experience at point guard as he had the ball in his hands the majority of the time. His on-ball ability could use some work as he struggled with one-on-one confrontations with defenders, especially those who got physical with him. His shot creation was questionable as he was often forcing contested shots off the move, and it was the same at the rim. Where he shines the most is getting to his spots in the mid-range, as well as his playmaking ability, notably off the pick and roll where he really seemed to have an eye for finding good shots for his teammates. Now, he did have a lot of turnovers, but I wouldn't say that I'm too worried about that, considering that I doubt running the offense will be his main role on the Hawks. He's an off-ball type of player who can provide you with the occasional playmaking that's needed off the bench. On defense, despite his skinny frame, he was good at sticking with ball handlers, getting good contests, and he showed off some shot blocking ability for a guard. His ability to hound the ball would be very useful to the Hawks, whose backcourt struggles to defend. Despite his initial struggles in Summer League, I definitely saw improvements as each game went by. Whether it was increased aggressiveness or showing more patience to make the defense move to his will, I was impressed by him, even if the stats may not support it. Moving on to my favorite out of the three, Mohamed Gay is a lengthy forward who's only been playing basketball for a few years, but it was amazing watching him in Summer League. He's a tall, athletic forward who's aggressive on the defensive end, showing his shot blocking prowess and a rebounding ability, and on the offensive side of the ball, while he usually doesn't have the ball in his hands, he played his role, setting screens, boxing out, and was a cutting lob threat. He also helped space out the floor, showing a willingness to take threes. While he needs to work on his shooting efficiency, along with his shot selection at the mid-range, for a big man looking to stretch the floor, he shot 38% from 3, with 3.2 attempts throughout their 5 games. Now the guy I was most impressed with was Seth Lundy. While I feel like the term is too loosely used, he's a 3-and-D player who can successfully move off the ball, and he has a very smooth and consistent jump shot. He's aggressive on the defensive end, as well as being able to attack the rim if needed on offense. He shot 32% from 3, taking 6.8 threes per game, and making 2.2 of them. So while it's not the best percentage, there's definitely potential there if you can get more players run for him to get wide open. A lot of the time he was forcing threes, so more off-ball play would be more beneficial for him in the long run. Now, I'm doubtful on whether any of them will get any significant minutes, especially with some of the depth preventing that from happening. Even so, it'll be a season of learning for those three, so I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do. Over and over and over and over and over again. Every trade deadline for the past few years has been filled with the rumor of a John Collins trade. It's honestly become an expectation that he wouldn't get traded at this point. But it finally happened. This offseason, the Hawks finally traded him in exchange for Rudy Gay and a second-round pick. Yeah. It's pretty obvious the decision was made with cap relief as the objective. However, this trade honestly puts into perspective, is paying a guy to prevent them from walking in free agency for nothing always a good idea? In the 2021 offseason, Collins signed a 5-year, $125 million extension with the Hawks. That season he had averaged 17 points per game, 7 rebounds, and a block. The previous season he had averaged 21 points per game, 10 rebounds, and 1.6 blocks. At the time he was viewed as a very promising athletic forward, and while the Hawks were looking into trading him at the time, they paid him an average of $25 million per year to extend their trade timeline. This was the same season where Capella joined the Hawks, which would slowly change his role for the team all the way until now. To put this into perspective, John Collins averaged 5.1 pick-and-roll man possessions per game in 2020, which is 3rd in the league. This was on 61% shooting, and for players who had averaged 3 or more possessions per game, He had the highest points per possession with 1.31. With the addition of Capella, who became the main screen setter and roller, he was pushed into the corner due to Capella's inability to space the floor. In 2021, he averaged 2.5 pick and roll man possessions per game, and Capella averaged 3.3. He went from 3rd in the league to the 31st. Now in 2023, he no longer has the same views that he once had, and teams were less likely to pursue him due to his large contract. Yet, the Jazz still took a chance on him. I personally think this was good for both sides. John Collins doesn't have to hear rumors about him getting traded year after year, and the Hawks finally get off of his contract, as they'll need to pay guys like Okongwu and Saddiq Bey after next year. I'll definitely miss his lobs with Trey, the leadership he brought to the team, as well as what he brought to Hawks culture. But I can also understand that outside of his contract, he had a fair amount of problems on both ends of the floor. Free agency has basically come to an end at this point, with fewer notable players left to be signed. Even with John Collins' contract gone, the Hawks still aren't in any position to sign any of the top players left, considering they have a fairly large payroll, including Trey, Clint, DeAndre, Bogdan, and Dejounte Murray, all making close to or above $20 million a year. They did trade for veterans Rudy Gay and Patty Mills, as well as signing Wesley Matthews. This is reminiscent to their overall successful 2021 season with vets like Rondo and Lou Will. The team is fairly young, an average age around 25, which of course decreases if you remove their new veteran additions. Hopefully, they'll bring good leadership to the team that's looking to contend next season, but also still needing to figure things out. Dejounte Murray recently signed a 4-year extension, so it seems like the organization is committed to keeping him. Whether they're doing that because they don't want him to leave after trading all of that draft capital for him or not, that'll be something that we have to find out in the future. Anyways, it looks like the Hawks are going into the next season with most of their main core intact outside of John Collins. There are rumors of a Pascal Siakam trade, but I've seen a lot of mixed feelings in the Hawks fan base. An All-NBA player last season, Siakam continues to improve his game and could be the scoring big man that the Hawks need, which he probably is, because he can improve the floor spacing and he can also handle the ball at times to allow Trey and Murray to move more off the ball. There are a few problems with acquiring him though. One is his expiring contract next year, as well as him saying that he won't resign if he's traded. Another problem lies in who will be traded for him. It's likely that the Raptors, who everyone knows values their players very highly, will likely ask for a mixture of Onyeka Okongwu, Jalen Johnson, or AJ Griffin, with Hunter possibly being in the loop as well. Me personally, I'm mixed on the trade. I'm skeptical on whether investing heavily into another star like the Hawks did with Murray will be good in the long term. If the Hawks trade their developing talent for him and underachieve, they could risk losing him next year, gaining really nothing in terms of their investment. Obviously, when you see someone as good as Siakam, you want them on your team, but throwing big names on the team just for the sake of it often doesn't work. We've seen that many times in the past. I don't think his addition to the team significantly improves their problems with three-point shooting with the amount of capital they provide for him, as well as his defense being pretty mediocre, which won't add to a team that already struggles on that front. So while I find it intriguing, I'm not sure if it's the best idea long term, and I really just see them being minor contenders, as opposed to the major ones in the East like the Celtics, the Heat, and the Bucks. The Hawks still have some very good young players who will be receiving more minutes in the coming season. These players have looked very promising, and they'll most likely have larger roles in the team. These players being Onyeka Okongwu, Jalen Johnson, and AJ Griffin. Onyeka Okongwu. He's an athletic and explosive big who upon getting drafted was compared to center Bam Adebayo, as they're both relatively short for the position but are positives on the defensive end. He's a very good back-to-the-basket defender and shows a lot of resistance to larger players, bothering the offense and forcing them to take uncomfortable shots. When switched onto small guards, he's able to stick with them as well as cutting them off. He guards the pick and roll well, knowing when to drop, and he reacts well to passes in the pocket in order to get good quality contests. He also plays good weak side help defense, showing good body control to quickly get under the basket to wait for the right moment to attempt the block. One concern on defense though, is that he often gets into foul trouble due to his constant jumping and erratic movement in the air, so more discipline is needed from him on that side of the ball, as he averaged 3.1 fouls per game. Now while his defensive abilities really show both on and off the ball, on offense he can provide you with some mid-range shooting. He shot 48% from the mid-range, taking 56 shots and making 27 of them. This is what gives fans hopes of him possibly developing a three ball, which would be highly valuable for the Hawks offense and spacing in general. In his 13 threes attempted last season, he made 4, which is about 31%. Maybe with Quinn Snyder's offense, he'll get some increased shooting attempts to see if he can possibly produce from that area. To talk about his inside game, his build allows for him to perform finesse around the rim, especially on slower defenders at his position. He's also a strong offensive rebounder with the awareness to quickly kick it out to the perimeter for a shot, or go back up with the ball. Next season will be crucial in his development as a player, and I hope to see him getting some starter opportunities. Now with AJ Griffin, he had a very impressive season last year despite his lack of minutes. In his 20 minutes per game, he averaged 9 points, 2 rebounds, and 1 assist. While that doesn't look impressive by itself, what really catches the eye is the fact that he shot 47% from the field, 39% from 3 on almost 4 threes per game, and 89% from the free throw line. It's kind of like a 50-40-90 season. Okay, not really, but that's an optimistic way to look at it. Where AJ really shines is his catch and shooting, with his ability to get open off a screen, as well as his pull-up shooting, where he shot 47% from 3 and 49% from the field. His solid footwork allows for his craftiness to stand out, taking and making tough shots off the fade. He has a good change of pace and is patient with the ball, and in the inside he has a nice use of a floater, shooting 66% at the rim. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, there's definitely room for improvement. He has solid on-ball defense, but needs to better navigate and fight off-ball screens, in which he's slow to recover and contest shots. He also struggles to guard players who can quickly change directions and get him to slide, which results in him easily getting blown past. Going into next season, he'll be seeing more minutes, so I'm looking forward to seeing how he develops as he gets an improved role. And the last guy is Jalen Johnson. The 6'7" forward is in an interesting position this coming season, with John Collins now traded. The starting power forward position is now open, which means that it could either be him or Saddiq Bey at the 4. It's also possible that DeAndre Hunter moves to the 4 and one of them shifts to the 3, but I think that's unlikely due to Hunter's lack of rebounding ability. Jalen Johnson is an athletic finisher on the offensive side of the ball, often operating as a screen setter and roller. He can create his own shot to get to the rim, and watching him last season convinced me he has the potential as a point forward if the offense begins to move from less isolation-based ball. He has good vision and instinctively and reactively makes good passes and has the ball secured if he needs to attack the basket himself. He's also a good runner in transition, and at his length, this creates a lot of scoring opportunities. A big problem on offense is his shooting. He is very inconsistent from 3 despite getting many wide open attempts, where at times he may not even shoot the ball. And while it's good to know your own strengths, with this Hawks team that desperately needs shooting, it makes me doubt whether he'll start in the first place. That may be the aspect that gets Saddiq Bey in the starting lineup. Now what I'm high on for Jalen is his defensive versatility, something that the Hawks were lacking from their forwards last season. When guarding on ball, he puts his arms to good use to cut off the ball handler, slides his feet well, uses his body well to disrupt players and make them uncomfortable, being comfortable with taking contact. I mean, there's even more. He plays passing lanes well, rebounds well on both ends. He's really good. Now whether he'll start or not is up for debate, but even if he doesn't, it's still possible that him and Saddiq Bey could share the starting spot depending on how he plays throughout the season. Overall, I think this team is due for a better season than last year. I can't see them being any worse, as they now have a full season under Quinn Snyder, who's been able to bring in his own personal staff and can implement his own system. Out of the 8 seasons he coached the Jazz, in 4 of them they were a top 5 defense. Of course, I'm not expecting them to improve drastically on that end, but I'm hoping to see some change. On offense, they are rated 7th despite not being a very good 3-point shooting team, and I can see them being even better next season. Trae Young did have a worse season offensively, but I think if he plays more off ball, it'll benefit the team more in the long run, and he might unlock a new part of his game. Despite his shooting, he's still one of the best playmakers in the league, with it being a focal point of the team and a large reason the offense can function as it is. Murray is also still a very good player who I believe can show a leap on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, and it's up to the rest to use the offseason for self-improvement. I'm looking forward to the next season, and that's it for my analysis on the Hawks. Later.